10 performers, 1 decade, a cultural earthquake that Hollywood has never fully stopped feeling. The 1990s did not simply produce funny movies, it produced a specific and unrepeatable constellation of human beings who each cracked the comedy code from an entirely different angle. One man turned his own face into a special effect. Another hid profound tenderness inside manic fireworks. A woman built an empire from a single raised eyebrow, while another dismantled every assumption Hollywood had placed around her beauty. Some of them the critics adored. Some of them the critics dismissed entirely. The box office, the cultural memory, and the sheer enduring weight of their work rendered both verdicts largely irrelevant. These are the performers who made the funniest decade in Hollywood history. And this is the story the highlight reels never quite told. Before CGI could manufacture impossible faces, one man did it himself. Jim Carrey did not simply enter Hollywood, he detonated inside it. Born in Newmarket, Ontario, Carrey had spent years grinding through comedy clubs and bit television roles, sharpening a physical instrument that seemed genuinely unconstrained by normal human anatomy. By the time 1994 arrived, the industry was completely unprepared for what was coming. In a single calendar year, he delivered 3 films that would each independently define a career. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber. The American box office responded with over $340 million combined. Studios scrambled. Audiences were not just entertained, they were genuinely stunned. But the most revealing chapter came later. In 1998, The Truman Show stripped away every elastic expression and manic gesture, leaving something quieter and far more unsettling underneath. A performer of that magnitude, capable of that stillness, was not simply funny. He was something rarer, a genuine original.
If Jim Carrey was a controlled explosion, Robin Williams was something altogether less containable. Williams had arrived in the public consciousness through Mork and Mindy in the late 1970s, but the 1990s became the decade where his full range finally found its proper stage. Mrs. Doubtfire in 1993 earned over $441 million worldwide, a domestic comedy built entirely on the emotional architecture of one performer willing to be both ridiculous and heartbreaking inside the same scene. That same year, his voice work as the genie in Disney's Aladdin had already demonstrated something studios were only beginning to fully understand. Williams did not perform characters. He inhabited entire emotional frequencies that most trained actors could not locate on a map. What separated him from his contemporaries was a quality that resisted easy categorization. The comedy was never purely comedic. There was always something underneath it, a current of genuine tenderness, occasionally grief running just below the surface of every manic riff. The audience always felt it, even when they could not name it.
In a decade dominated by manic physical comedy and elastic faces, Whoopi Goldberg operated in an entirely different register. Where Carrey contorted and Williams combusted, Goldberg held still, and somehow that stillness hit harder. Her comedic weapon was precision. A raised eyebrow, a perfectly timed pause, a single dry line delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had absolutely nothing to prove. Ghost in 1990 was technically a romantic thriller. It earned over $505 million worldwide and took home the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. What Goldberg built inside that film was not a supporting performance. It was a masterclass in comic timing embedded inside genuine emotional stakes. She made audiences laugh without once undercutting the grief surrounding her. Sister Act in 1992 then gave her the full platform. Over $231 million at the global box office confirmed what sharper observers already understood. Whoopi Goldberg was not riding the comedy wave of the 1990s. She was quietly anchoring it. There is a particular kind of genius that disguises itself as stupidity. Adam Sandler spent the entire 1990s perfecting it. Sandler had sharpened his instincts on Saturday Night Live between 1990 and 1995, developing characters built on arrested development, deliberate crudeness, and a specific strain of American male immaturity that somehow resonated across every demographic. Critics circled, audiences did not care. Billy Madison in 1995 cost approximately $10 million to produce and earned over $26 million domestically on a concept that required its lead to repeat elementary school as an adult. Happy Gilmore followed in 1996, merging professional golf with barely contained aggression to earn over $41 million worldwide. The Waterboy in 1998 then crossed $161 million globally, a figure that silenced even the most determined critical opposition. What the reviews consistently missed was the sociological
surgical precision underneath the noise. Sandler was not accidentally connecting with audiences. He was mapping a very specific emotional territory, the defiant refusal of adult performance with remarkable consistency. The slacker understood exactly what he was doing.
Some performers chase reinvention out of desperation. Eddie Murphy did it out of sheer creative restlessness. By the time the 1990s opened, Murphy had already rewritten the rules of American comedy twice over. Saturday Night Live in the early 1980s, Beverly Hills Cop in 48 Hours, defining an entire decade of action comedy. He arrived at the 1990s not as a hungry newcomer, but as a proven force with something far more dangerous than ambition. He had range. The Nutty Professor in 1996 became the defining exhibit. Murphy did not simply play Sherman Klump, he inhabited 7 distinct characters across a single production, each with individual physical mannerisms, vocal registers, and emotional logic. The film earned over $273 million worldwide. The craft underneath the laughter was genuinely extraordinary. Dr. Dolittle in 1998 then confirmed the pattern, over $294 million globally. Critics remained divided. Audiences remained unconvinced by the critics. Murphy never needed their permission. He never had.
There is a precise distinction between a comedian who parodies culture and one who becomes culture. Mike Myers crossed that line and never looked back. Wayne Campbell had arrived first. Wayne's World in 1992, adapted from Myers' own Saturday Night Live sketch, earned over $183 million worldwide on a production budget of approximately $14 million. The film did not simply satirize suburban American adolescence, it celebrated it with such specific affection that the satire became sincere, and the sincerity became a phenomenon. Then came Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery in 1997. The initial theatrical run was modest. Home video and cable television then detonated its cultural reach across an entirely different trajectory. By the time The Spy Who Shagged Me arrived in 1999, the franchise had accumulated over $312 million globally and embedded its catchphrases so deeply into popular language that linguistic researchers would later document them as genuine cultural artifacts. Myers was not writing jokes. He was engineering viral language a full decade before the digital architecture existed to explain how it spread. Yeah, baby. Indeed.
Before cringe comedy became a genre, before awkwardness became an aesthetic, Ben Stiller was already living inside the discomfort and charging admission. Stiller had arrived through the industry's least glamorous door. The Ben Stiller Show on MTV and Fox between 1990 and 1993 earned critical recognition, including an Emmy Award, while simultaneously failing to attract a mass audience. The irony was fitting. He was always slightly ahead of where the culture was looking. There's Something About Mary in 1998 changed the coordinates entirely. Produced on a budget of approximately $23 million, the film earned over $369 million worldwide. The comedy operated on a specific frequency of sustained male humiliation and relentless situational misfortune that audiences found both excruciating and completely irresistible. What separated Stiller from his contemporaries was a dual fluency most comedians never develop. He could perform neurotic helplessness on screen with total commitment, while simultaneously operating behind the camera with the precise critical intelligence of someone who understood exactly why it was funny. The awkward everyman knew precisely what he was doing. That was always the joke. In a decade defined by men contorting their faces and engineers of absurdity, Meg Ryan built her comedy from an entirely different blueprint. When Harry Met Sally had technically arrived in 1989, but its cultural gravitational pull extended deep into the 1990s, redefining what screen comedy could mean when anchored in recognizable human confusion rather than theatrical exaggeration. Ryan's performance established a template that an entire generation of romantic comedies would attempt to replicate and consistently fail to match. Sleepless in Seattle in 1993 earned over $227 million worldwide. You've Got Mail in 1998 followed with over $250 million globally. Both films operated on the same fundamental principle. Ryan's characters were not performing comedy, they were performing humanity, with such specific authenticity that the humor emerged organically from the recognizable texture of real emotional life. At her peak, she commanded fees of up to $10 million per film, a figure that positioned her among the highest paid performers in Hollywood, regardless of gender. The comedy was never the point. The truth underneath it always was.
There is a specific and rare achievement in comedy that almost no performer manages: to begin as a clown and evolve into a literary figure without losing a single step of the original absurdity. Steve Martin did exactly that.
By the time the 1990s arrived, Martin had already spent 2 decades dismantling and rebuilding what American comedy could look like. The wild and crazy energy of his 1970s stand-up work had given way to increasingly precise screenwriting and a cinematic sensibility that operated well above the standard comedy framework of the era. Father of the Bride in 1991 earned over $254 million worldwide, anchored entirely by Martin's ability to locate genuine emotional vulnerability inside broad domestic comedy without ever tipping into sentimentality. Bowfinger in 1999, which Martin also wrote, demonstrated a sharper satirical intelligence, dissecting Hollywood's mythology with the precision of someone who had spent decades studying it from the inside. Parallel to the films, Martin was publishing essays, plays, and eventually novels, building a literary body of work that existed entirely independently of his screen career. The sophisticate and the clown were never two different people. They were always the same instrument, played at different registers.
In 1994, Cameron Diaz walked onto a film set for the first time in her professional life. The film was The Mask. Her co-star was Jim Carrey at the precise peak of his cultural detonation. She held the scene. That fact alone told an informed observer nearly everything necessary about what was coming. Diaz had no prior acting credits. She had been discovered through modeling. By every conventional industry calculation, she should have been peripheral. Instead, she was magnetic, commanding the frame with a natural comic confidence that most trained performers spend years failing to locate. There's Something About Mary in 1998 then provided the definitive exhibit. Produced alongside Ben Stiller, Diaz demonstrated an almost fearless comic commitment, engaging with material that required complete abandonment of self-consciousness. The film earned over $369 million worldwide. Her performance earned a Golden Globe nomination. What the decade ultimately revealed was a performer operating against every assumption the industry had constructed around her. The glamour was real. The intelligence behind it was realer still. Hollywood had cast her as decoration. She arrived as architecture.
10 performers, 10 completely distinct approaches to the same fundamental human need, the need to laugh. And beneath that, always the deeper need to feel recognized, to see your own confusion, your own absurdity, your own stubborn refusal to behave with appropriate dignity reflected back from a screen and validated completely. What the funniest decade in Hollywood history ultimately produced was not simply entertainment. It was a decade-long argument made by 10 different voices in 10 different registers that the most honest thing a human being can do is find the comedy inside the condition. They made us laugh. What they were really doing was telling the truth.